when an event happens, we have to triage that event in our environment, right? We have to go out and figure out what's happened, what's critical, what's the extent, what's the scope of the incident. And we typically have to understand that before we make any decisions on how we remediate, how we recover, how we do our incident investigation. And it kind of falls into this video where we talk about event triaging and everything about event triaging, from what it is to the different types of event categories, and all the way through the actual triaging process. So let's jump in and have a look at the first part here around, well, what is event triaging? Well, we have to figure out, is the event firstly true? So the very first component is this true? And before we spoke about our true positives and our true negatives and false positives, false negatives, we're going to have to go away and understand, well, how are we going to classify this event? And we have to figure it out. Did this event actually occur? Is it a false positive? Did it not occur? Or was there some sort of inoperability between a system and it gave us a false impersonation or a false attempt of an event? So if it is true, well, then we need to go away and perform a triage and figure out a few things. Well, what do we have to figure out? Well, first thing we need to figure out is, well, what on earth is going on? So what's going on, and determine what part of the environment was affected. We also have to look at number 2 here, something like, well, what type of event is this? So what type of event is this? Now, is this being classified? Do we understand how we're going to respond to this event? Who's responsible for this event? There's a different sort of questions that we have to sort of answer. And the third one here is, well, is it critical? And is it not critical? Is it critical? Is something exposed but it shouldn't be exposed? Who needs to be involved? Is it some sort of compliance requirement that we then have to get maybe a compliance team involved, or is it under a regulated industry that we're in? Because at this point, we're kind of unsure, right? So we have to then go away and determine, well, what this event is, right? So if it's true, then we can define the type of category of the event and then categorize it. So that way we can determine how to handle it, because then we're obviously there are certain teams and specialties of those teams that we have to get involved, right? So if there's a malware specific incident that happens, well, then we need a bunch of malware people that actually understand how to maybe reverse engineer the application to understand a bit about how that malware is working, right? So there are different teams and parties that we then have to be involved in that process. So we have to go through and clearly define basically these areas of the event triage process. So having sort of said that, let's move over into the event categories. And I've got a bit of a triangle here, and this triangle represents no specific order per se. This is just easy for us to sort of categorize and understand a bit more around the event categories or some possible event categories that exist. And some of them are things like physical security, right? If someone is on the premise and they shouldn't be allowed there, well, something has happened, right? Maybe they've taken some sort of physical documents, maybe they've taken physical appliances. We can then categorize that event as a physical security event. So that's number 1. And number 2 could be unauthorized access. Now, this can be also a type of physical. I'm going to write unauthorized access. And this can be, again, a physical type of security, a breach where someone's physically gone into an appliance or a physical branch of some sort. They've taken something out that they shouldn't have. Again, that can also be classified as an unauthorized access. But typically, unauthorized access is someone who accesses something on a system who doesn't have the right authority to do so. So anything that's classified as unauthorized access, again, could be classified as an event category. Then we've got things like a denial of service or distributed denial of service. So service inoperability affecting services so they don't respond, hanging up those services. So again, they don't have the resources through memory or CPU to then go away and complete those job functions that they require. It could be a typical web server. So then we can go away and categorize that as potentially a denial of service event category. Then we've got things like our ransomware. So I'm just going to write ransom as number 4 here. And ransomware, again, is just highly annoying. We understand a bit about ransomware. That could be something from being deployed on the environment. It could be spreading. We go away and then we classify this incident or classify the event specifically as a ransomware incident. Then we've got things like perimeter breach. This could be something that's on the internet per se. Let me just clear that up. So put number 5 there. That's better. So typically someone on the outside of the network makes its way in. So this is potentially if we've got our internet here, and then someone out here is doing attacks across the perimeter itself, and they could be looking at maybe, historical breaches of passwords of some sort, or maybe they've used Shodan. And if you're unfamiliar with Shodan, Shodan is an amazing tool set. We can go online and look at publicly exposed services through webcams or maybe exposed Windows servers. You get access to those servers. So if they've made their way in through an external breach of some sort, again, it could be a phishing related attack. So then we can go away and typically categorize these things as unauthorized access, phishing if it's perimeter breach, and maybe they've done some sort of attack like that for them to get access to internal resources. So perimeter breach is all about the external finding their way internally. And then finally here we've got something like users. So this could be a user event category where users are unable to work, so don't work, and that's affecting the internal users, right? Could this be a single user or an entire department? Could this be maybe, so I'm just going to put here, is this a single user? Could this be departments of users? Maybe specific business units. So if we've got a whole business unit that could be affected, maybe it's the executive team, and then we can go away and we can actually categorize these based on that event process that's happened. So from there on, we can then obviously assign criticality levels to these incidents. So should we get 600 alerts in a day, well, then we don't want to be fuffling things through with that are an alert priority of low, right? So we want to go away and categorize these events in a systematic format that we can go away and really determine how bad are things, right? So if things are really, really bad, well, then there's a couple of things that we can classify them as, right? One could be critical. This is mission critical. Maybe it's highly sensitive to the business. Maybe a portal has gone offline and that's now impacting, the financial side of things within the business. So we can go away and classify that as a potential critical issue. We've got things like high, medium, and low. And then what we can then typically do is, well, anything that's pretty much a high and a medium, that's going to be our main priority for the day. And anything that could be a medium or a low, and then, things like that. So we can basically focus our efforts and then rank the seriousness of those incidents, right? So again, if we've got something like 60 alerts going off, well, then how do we categorize the importance of these and identify where do we basically focus our resources on? So this helps us identify that. And then finally, right now, we're going to cover the event triaging process. And it may look something like this, right? Now, this is just me kind of spitballing a little bit here. Nothing is sort of concrete and this is the only way to do it or anything like that. This is just my opinion and things that I've sort of worked on and seen in the environment, so I can sort of easily understand how do we classify or triage an incident. So typically I would look at it and say, well, is this event real? Right, first and foremost, right? Is this actually happened? Is it a false positive? Is it a false negative? How do we come up with that decision? So again, is this thing real? And if not, then that's great. Then we don't have to worry about it. But if it is, well, then we need to go up this ladder. So is it real or not is the first question. And then the scope. So we need to understand the extent of the event that's happened. So what's the impact? Is this a single user, multiple business units? Is this the entire business itself? Can it not function? Did it affect an executive leadership team in a phishing component? We don't know. So we've got to understand the extent of the scope. So again, single user, so I might just say single user. Was it a single user in a phishing assessment that he or she maybe ran to you and said, hey, I clicked on a link, I shouldn't have, and then we're starting to investigate that. Could be the entire department, entire business, maybe it's the whole business can't function, etc. Right? So we go away, we define the scope, we understand the extent of the attack, and then from there we can categorize it. So in here, in this specific area, we categorize what the event is based on, right? And the event category could be the one of 5 or the 5 things that we spoke about here, the 6 themes, right? Could be a physical, could be unauthorized access, could be a denial of service, could be ransomware, could be a perimeter breach, or again, it could be users. So we go away and then we categorize our event. based on those areas. And then we define the criticality of it. So do we then have our what's the critical nature of the assessment? So is it critical? Is it a medium? Is it a low? Is it a high? And we have to basically define that, right? So once all the info is done, then we understand, right? So then we can escalate. So here we actually have to escalate it once we've identified the incident. So we've gone through the scope, we understand the nature of the attack, we've categorized it, it's unauthorized access of some sort, it's critical because it's affecting, maybe 100 users. Now we've got to go away and actually escalate this. And this will typically happen through either, maybe the CISO within the organization or the head of information security, so the information security manager of some sort. And we've got to go away, and then what would happen is we have to declare this as an incident. So who has the authority to then declare the event? It is in fact an incident. So we've got to make sure that our processes are followed. We've got information security response policy and things like that. We've got to go away and escalate. Escalate. Let me just clean that up a little bit. I'm just going to use the color green here, and I'll just recolor this quickly. And that's not the green, but that's okay. And then I'll just go escalate. And then we've got to escalate that, right? So we've got to declare this as an incident. So we've got to physically and whole department wide has to declare as incident. And then from there, and only at that time, then the incident response team is where we'll interact, right? And that's the only point where we involve the incident response team. So that's essentially the event triaging process. In the next couple of videos, we're going to look at some playbooks and the actual incident response process. And again, how do we automate things as well through SOAR platforms? So I hope you've enjoyed this video. In this video, we covered all things from event triaging process, which we just defined, obviously defining the category levels, and then moving through our event and categorizing, so categorizing the events, and finally, what is event triaging? So I hope you've enjoyed this video. As always, we'll see you all in the next video.